Chapter 7. Teacher Bao. Bao absent-mindedly opened the door and stepped onto the front porch, looking for an empty spot on the steps leading to the small garden in front of the house. He sat down, reached for a hot cup of coffee nearby, and quickly pulled out a pack of cigarettes, putting one between his lips and lighting it. He took a long drag like a true smoker and slowly exhaled white clouds of smoke, which floated in delicate waves before disappearing into some unseen space. Suddenly, he flicked the half-smoked cigarette forcefully into the garden in a gesture of frustration, something that rarely happened to him. In fact, Bao was upset about something trivial that had occurred a few days ago during a meeting of the local Retired Teachers Association. Someone had questioned him, "Why did you return to Vietnam while the communists were still there?" Before 1975, Bao was a Vietnamese literature teacher at a private high school in Saigon. Around 1963, he was drafted to attend the Tu Duc Reserve Officer Training School, and upon graduation, he was assigned to a combat unit in the 1st Military Zone. About a year later, he was reassigned by the Ministry of National Defense to the Ministry of Education to continue his teaching profession. For Bao, the Vietnam War was a politically complex conflict, but ultimately it was still a proxy war between two ideologies, capitalism and communism. Bao didn't like to delve deeply into it. He was just a teacher who loved teaching, loved analyzing stories like The Tale of Kiyu, and reading poems by Zon Du, Lu Trong Lu and Han Mak Tu. Bao had the demeanor of an artist more than a strict, exemplary teacher. He liked to smoke and always wore his hair long down to his nape. When teaching poetry, especially Han Mak Tu's love poems, his voice would lower as he read each line slowly, carefully repeating each word as if they were musical notes rising and falling. The entire class would sit in silence, listening intently. His unique delivery created a strong allure, bringing characters to life and materializing the imagery in the poems he was reading. Because of these special qualities, students affectionately nicknamed him Tu Nguyen, after a poet from Bich Khao Ki Go. Bao often told his students that art must serve art itself, to express and fully understand the beauty and mysterious magic of literature. He compared a great poem to a beautiful rose created by nature or night-blooming jasmine with its intoxicating fragrance. The beauty of the rose and the scent of the jasmine existed naturally without any intention beyond themselves. Bao believed that to fully reveal the emotions of a poem, one must place oneself in the shoes of the poem's characters. Like a singer who must inhabit a song to truly convey its beauty, a reader of poetry must become part of the story to grasp its essence. Then came April 30th, 1975. In the initial period of societal upheaval, schools temporarily closed, and Bao had to stay home waiting. He began to see changes in local leadership at the grassroots level in his neighborhood, and felt an intuition that something bad was about to happen. His prediction wasn't wrong. Shortly after, the people in his ward were required to register their personal details. The ward chief was none other than Tu Theo, a thug who had dodged military service before 1975. When Bao went to register, Tu Theo sat behind the desk, glaring at him with cold eyes, his voice brusque. "You're a teacher, right?" "Yes, I taught at a private high school in Saigon." Tu Theo reached into a drawer, pulled out some papers, handed them to Bao, and pointed to an empty table at the back of the room. "Go over there and fill out all your details on these forms. A comrade from the education department will follow up with you later. Make sure you fill everything out truthfully. No hiding anything, got it?" Bao took the papers and, feeling like a lifeless shell, walked to the table. He never imagined that his life could change so drastically and so quickly. Before that day, Bao had never had any interaction with Tu Theo in the neighborhood. He only knew that Tu Theo had lived with the family of Mr. Hai, a cyclo driver, and had no real job. He'd wander around the neighborhood, picking up odd jobs when available. Occasionally, he would borrow Mr. Hai's cyclo to transport passengers at night. That was all Bao knew about him, and no one else in the neighborhood seemed curious enough to inquire about his background either. Because of the 3-centimeter scar on the left side of his forehead, people called him Tu Theo, Scarface. He didn't bother anyone, so no one cared about the story behind his scar. About half an hour later, Bao finished filling out the forms and brought them back to Tu Theo. "I've filled everything out. Please review it." "Are you sure it's all complete?" Tu Theo asked. "I believe I included everything." After a quick glance at the forms, Tu Theo smirked. "You call this a complete form? You're a literature teacher, and this is what you write." "I listed my profession and background as required. What else do you want me to include?" Bao asked, confused. Tu Theo crumpled up the form and threw it into the trash bin. He reached into his drawer for a new set of papers. "You need to include every date, year and detail of where your family lived, what they did for a living, everything. Now go back to the table and fill it out again." Bao felt his pride being crushed by this uneducated man, who now had the authority in this wretched ward. His cheeks flushed with heat as he swallowed his rage. He grabbed the new set of forms and silently returned to the table. This time he racked his brain, listing every family member, from his paternal and maternal grandparents down to his siblings, without missing a single person. After more than an hour, he reviewed the forms one last time and believed they were as thorough as Tu Theo wanted, so he brought them back. Once again, Tu Theo looked at him with a contemptuous laugh. "You seem to forget things quickly for a teacher. Didn't you once serve as an officer in the puppet army?" Bao, annoyed, replied directly, "Yes, I went through Tuduk Reserve Officer School from 1962 to 1964. "Then why didn't you include that in your form? What did you do during that time?" Tu Theo asked. "I was a low-ranking reserve officer just out of school. And it's been so long since then. I went back to teaching, so I didn't think it was that important." Tu Theo's expression turned cold, and he spoke slowly, emphasizing each word. "To you, it may not be important, but to us, you were an enemy of the people, a traitor who sold out the country. Do you understand?" Bao wanted to retort, "To you communists, everyone is an enemy. There are millions of enemies in the South alone." But he stopped himself in time, thinking, there's no point arguing with this man. He's like a horse with blinders, only following the reins of his master. Bao glanced at his watch, then back at Tu Theo. "It's already past 5 in the afternoon. If it's not urgent, could I take these forms home to fill out and return them to you tomorrow morning?" After a moment of hesitation, Tu Theo nodded. "Fine. I know where you live in the ward. I'll keep these forms here. You go home and fill them out correctly. Bring them back tomorrow." Feeling thoroughly disheartened, instead of heading straight home, Bao drove his motorbike to the Saigon riverbank. He found an empty bench, parked his bike, and sat down, hoping the cool breeze from the river would ease the bitterness of his life's sudden upheaval. Bao remembered that just 2 weeks ago, the 2-story house of Uncle Nam on the outskirts of town, where Bao rented the upper floor while teaching, was his temporary refuge. It was a Sunday, just past 5 in the morning, when the family's brindle dog started barking furiously at something suspicious. The dog's prolonged barking woke Bao. He tossed off his blanket, stepped to the window, and peeked through the curtains. 5 soldiers in green khaki uniforms, armed to the teeth, were standing in the front yard, blocked by the dog. Bao quickly ran downstairs to inform the family. By then, Uncle and Aunt Nam had also woken up and stepped out of their room. Bao whispered to them, "Uncle Nam, it seems the police are here to search the house. There are 5 of them, and the dog is keeping them at bay." "Okay, Bao, go back to your room and act as if nothing is happening." "I'll take care of it," Uncle Nam replied. He walked to the window, opened it, and looked out. The police officers stood huddled together, clearly afraid of the dog. When they saw the window open, one of them shouted, "We're the local police. We have an order to search the house. Control your dog or we'll shoot it." "Give me a moment to put on my shirt," Uncle Nam said, though the officer impatiently yelled, "Hurry up." Aunt Nam, trembling, asked, "What do we do now, dear?" "Go hide all the jewelry quickly," Uncle Nam instructed. Hearing the familiar voice of the homeowner, the dog stopped barking and stood growling at the door. After donning his shirt, Uncle Nam turned on the house lights and opened the front door. The dog, seeing its owner, wagged its tail and ran into the living room. The officers followed closely behind. The leader spoke. "We have orders to inventory all of your household's assets." Several officers rushed to the back, closing the rear doors and checking for any other exits. Afterward, they gathered the family in the living room, and the leader asked Uncle Nam, "Are these all the people in your house?" "Yes. I had a son, but he went missing after you guys liberated the city. Bao here is just a tenant, staying while he teaches at the local school." "Your son went missing, or did he join the resistance? Or maybe he ran off with the Americans and puppets?" "My son went off for work and occasionally visited home. But we haven't heard from him for months. We don't know if he's alive or dead. We'll deal with that later. Right now, our task is to inventory and report all your assets to the state." After this, the officer pulled out a stack of papers from his bag and handed them to Uncle Nam. "Here, take these forms and list every asset, big or small, that you currently own. Remember to report everything honestly. We've been informed by the people that you are one of the wealthiest households in this ward. Make sure you don't leave anything out, understood?" Aunt Nam, standing beside her husband, began to sob. "What's left to report? Our shop in Cholan, where we sold fabric and clothes, was looted the day you liberated the city. They smashed the doors, broke the walls, and took everything. Now you want us to report what? There's nothing left." The leader of the police squad grew more aggressive. "We don't care about that. We only care that the people reported you as part of the capitalist bourgeoisie, who exploited the labor of the people. But we didn't exploit anyone's labor. Everything we built came from our own hard work and intelligence over decades. The day you liberated us was the day we lost everything." Aunt Nam cried. The officer cut her off. "Don't slander us like that, it's a crime. We came here to liberate the southern people, to give them freedom and happiness. Now we don't have time to discuss this with you. We'll stay here to maintain security while you finish your report." With that, the officer turned to Bao. "And you're the tenant, right?" "Yes, I rent a room from Uncle Nam while I teach." "So you're a teacher. Do you have any assets to report to the state?" the officer asked sarcastically. "Yes," Bao replied. "I have 3 or 4 sets of clothes for teaching, a blanket, a mosquito net, and a bed. Would you like me to report that?" One of the officers who had searched the upstairs room reported back. "We checked his room, but there's nothing of value." Satisfied, the officer nodded at Bao. "You're a teacher, an intellectual, part of the proletariat class. Very good. You can go back to your room, but don't leave the house until we're done." The entire day, Uncle and Aunt Nam had to rewrite and adjust their asset report multiple times. Each time they finished, the officers would split up to search the house, tearing apart closets, beds, and even the kitchen. If they found anything remotely valuable, they would berate Uncle and Aunt Nam. By noon, the police squad, having exhausted all possibilities, finally accepted the asset report. They gathered all the cash, jewelry, and valuables, stuffed them into a box, and locked it. They handed Uncle Nam a receipt, which was as worthless as trash. "Here, keep this receipt. We'll take the items to the authorities for a decision." Uncle Nam, looking defeated, slumped into a chair, unable to speak. Aunt Nam, devastated, wept uncontrollably. "God, all the hard work of our entire lives saved up for old age gone. Now you take it all to get a decision? What decision?" The police, ignoring her grief, left with the box of valuables. Upstairs, Bao had been confined, reading a book to pass the time, listening to the ruckus below. After the police left, the house was eerily silent, except for Aunt Nam's sobs of anguish. Bao tossed his book aside and descended the stairs to survey the scene. Uncle Nam sat with his head buried in his arms at the table. Aunt Nam was still on the floor, her hair disheveled, crying. Bao approached her. "Have they left, Auntie?" Yes. Those damned scoundrels have taken everything from us, she wailed. Looking at the scattered furniture and clothes strewn across the floor, Bao felt a lump in his throat, a silent rage against the inhuman regime. They used the pretense of rooting out landlords and capitalists, accusing anyone of exploiting the people, while targeting innocent, hard-working individuals. Bao had stayed with the Nam family long enough to know that they were honest, ethical businesspeople. Uncle Nam regularly donated money to support flood relief and orphanages. As a literature teacher with a degree in the arts, Bao had read extensively about the philosophical debates between idealism and materialism, and he had a fair understanding of both capitalist and communist ideologies. In the months following the fall of the South, Bao witnessed firsthand the irrational and inhumane actions of the Northern Communists. He often recalled the words of President Thieu, "Don't listen to what the Communists say, look at what they do." Now those words felt more accurate than ever. The sun was setting over the Saigon River. Apart from Bao, only a few others sat on benches, each lost in their own thoughts. Some stared at the ground, resigned like enslaved workers, while others gazed at the flowing river, perhaps chasing distant dreams. These were people living in the present, yet seemingly unable to accept the reality of the society in which they now found themselves. The noble image of the Vietnamese soldier, rising to overthrow colonial rule and win independence for the nation, was absent from the current regime. These officers were nothing more than mercenaries for a godless proletarian ideology under the dogma of Marx-Lenin. Wealthy people were lumped into the category of exploitative capitalists and were to be destroyed to pave the way for the establishment of a socialist state, the first step toward communism, in line with the spirit of the Third Communist International. Bao believed that sooner or later, he too would be classified as an intellectual with capitalist tendencies, just as intellectuals were during the land reform in the North or the purges under Mao Zedong in mainland China, where landlords were condemned and intellectuals were imprisoned. Wherever communism exists, it follows the same pattern. Its goal is to proletarianize the people, to make them easier to control. In summary, Marx and Engels categorized capitalists, landlords, and feudal lords as exploiters of the working class, backing their arguments with charts and scientific formulas. They encouraged and led these oppressed classes to rise and overthrow the capitalists and landlords, to claim ownership of the land and factories they worked on. Most farmers and workers, with limited education and understanding, were easily swayed by these appealing promises. But after they overthrew the capitalists and landlords, the factories and land fell under state control, led by the party. The workers and farmers, supposedly now the owners, continued working for a new master, the state-owned enterprises and cooperatives. Their lives returned to the same oppressive conditions, if not worse. Before, a worker or farmer could choose where to work. If treated unfairly, they could leave and find a better opportunity. But now, with only one employer in the state-controlled system, refusing to work meant starvation for the whole family. Worse, they could be labeled reactionary and accused of individualistic tendencies. The socialist system, with its centrally planned economy, was more corrupt and bureaucratic than the old capitalist or feudal systems. Farmers could no longer freely sell their produce. Instead, they were forced to sell at low prices to the government through cooperatives. Southern workers and farmers had opened their eyes and realized that the new regime was even more exploitative than the old landlords. They resisted through passive non-cooperation, abandoning their fields and avoiding heavy labor. They decided that they would rather starve than be exploited further. This became evident in the years following the North's liberation of the South. As Bao sat lost in thought, a hand clapped him on the shoulder from behind. "Hey, Professor, what are you doing sitting here all alone?" "Oh, Tam? It's a bit hot today, so I came out here to enjoy the river breeze." Tam was a history and geography teacher at the same school as Bao. He had recently gotten married to Lone, who used to work as an accountant for a large import-export company in Saigon. But after the fall of the South, the company's owner fled abroad, leaving Lone jobless just like her husband. Bao asked, "Where's Lone?" Why are you out here by yourself? She's busy selling goods at home. Bao looked surprised. Selling goods? What do you mean? Tam glanced around to make sure no one was eavesdropping. Yeah, she's selling cigarettes and coffee under the table to people in the apartment complex. Bao scratched his head and sighed. This society is so frustrating. Knowledgeable, capable people like us are ignored, while the ignorant are promoted just because they're tied to the regime. Sensing Bao's frustration, Tam interrupted. Let's not dwell on that. We do what we can to survive. Complaining will only get us in trouble. Last week, I took Lone back to her hometown in Bin Toi. Officially, it was to visit her family, but really, it was to borrow some money from her mother to start a small business. After we got married, all our savings went into buying an apartment. Then after a month, Lone lost her job, and I did too at the same time as you. We had to sell all our furniture piece by piece to survive. Now we have nothing left to sell, so Lone decided to take a risk and asked me to go to her family for a loan to buy cigarettes and coffee to sell. Bao looked at his friend with sympathy. You and Lone were the most well-off among us back when we were teaching. Now look at this. Who could have predicted this? Tam said. But let me tell you a funny story, or maybe it's a sad one for our nation. When we arrived in Bin Toi, we immediately registered with the local police. After they processed our papers, they invited us to a neighborhood meeting that evening to hear a report on the activities of the community. Since Lone was born and raised there, she wanted to hear what was happening in her old neighborhood. So after dinner, we dressed up a bit and went to the meeting with her parents. The local office, which used to be a village hall, had been slightly renovated for meetings. When we walked in, I noticed two bright red banners with bold black letters on either side of the hall's entrance. Curious, I stopped to read them. Down with the reliance on machinery. Long live the spirit of manual labor. I was confused and pointed it out to Lone. Look at this, Lone. In Saigon, the regime's newspapers are promoting industrialization, but here they seem to be completely against it. Is the king's law weaker than the village rules? Lone just smiled and said, You don't understand. The communists here are pushing for self-reliance. What do you mean? Remember the dinner we just had at my mom's house? Tam grinned. Oh, you mean the fish stew we had? That was a treat because we were visiting. Lone laughed. No, that's not it. If we stay longer, you'll see that the next meal will just be rice with fish sauce. Tam looked puzzled. What do you mean? You haven't heard the slogan about local self-reliance and self-sufficiency? Whatever a place produces, that's what people have to live on. In rural areas, it's rice instead of fish. In coastal areas, it's fish instead of rice. Trying to transport goods between regions is nearly impossible because of all the checkpoints and penalties. Before Tam could respond, the neighborhood meeting began. Everyone found a seat, with the elderly sitting up front and the younger people standing in the back. After introductions, a political instructor started lecturing about the new policies of the socialist regime. It was the usual rhetoric condemning the old capitalist regime, the imperialist American puppets, and their exploitation of the people. After more than an hour of this, the floor was opened for public comments. A local political officer encouraged the neighbors to share their thoughts. An elderly woman, Aunt Tam, raised her hand. She was respected in the community, not only because she was a poor peasant, but also because she had lost a son fighting for the communists. After the war, she was honored as a mother of a soldier with meritorious service to the revolution. Her comments were often praised, and she usually took the opportunity to praise the government's accomplishments. Today she stood up and spoke loudly. We are very grateful to the revolutionaries for liberating us early. If it weren't for you, the Viet Cong would have bombed us to death. The crowd burst into applause. Hearing this, Bao couldn't help but laugh. What? That doesn't make any sense. She's a countrywoman. She says what she thinks, even if it doesn't make sense, Tam said with a grin. About a month after Bao submitted his personal details to Theo, he received an invitation to attend a political re-education session organized by the Communist government for teachers and artists. Unlike the cramped and uncomfortable meetings at the local ward office, this session was held in a relatively decent venue with chairs and tables. When Bao entered the room, he immediately saw Van and Tam already seated. They waved him over excitedly. Van, a beautiful young English teacher from the same school, smiled warmly as she moved over to make space for him. "Come sit with us, Bao," Van called out, waving her hand. Bao smiled and shook hands with Tam as he sat down next to them. "When did you and Tam arrive?" Van quickly responded, "And Tam and I just got here about 5 minutes ago. We saw that you weren't here yet, and we were starting to get worried. I passed by your house, but the kids playing out front said you'd already left." Tam interjected into the conversation. "My wife also wanted to come early to see if there were any familiar faces, and we ran into Van here. Now that you're here, it's a bit less boring." The training class had about 30 people, most of them local teachers and artists. Bao scanned the room, trying to see if he could spot any other friends or acquaintances. Sensing what he was thinking, Tam whispered, "They all bolted." Bao nodded slightly and sighed. After the initial greetings, one of the two lecturers began speaking. "You all probably already have a general idea of the purpose of this political training class today, aimed specifically at you. The party and the state have classified you all as intellectuals of Saigon. Now that Vietnam is unified, independent, and free, the party wants all Southern artists and teachers to study and follow the guidelines and principles of our socialist society. The length of your study will depend on how quickly or slowly you comprehend the new guidelines. After these lessons, we will have a review and critique session, and you will have the right to express your individual opinions freely, and any concerns will be addressed satisfactorily." During the first lesson, the entire class was completely silent. No one had any questions, and no one offered any opinions. The lecturer kept droning on like a machine, reciting lines from the party's prepared materials. Every word came from Comrade Marx, Comrade Lenin, and Comrade Ho, and thus we were expected to listen and follow precisely. Throughout the lecture, Bao felt deeply bored. They kept repeating the same terms about how Southern culture was degenerate, unable to serve the needs of the people, that capitalist traders exploited labor, and how all this went against Marx and Engels' ideology, following in the footsteps of American imperialism, and so on and so on. Finally, at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, they ended the first day's lesson. As soon as they left the class, Tam quickly said his goodbyes, explaining that he had to hurry home because his wife was waiting. Bao turned to Van and asked, "How did you get here, Van?" "I took a pedicab. Then hop on my bike." "I'll give you a ride home," Bao offered. Van smiled and nodded in agreement. Bao checked his watch and then suggested, "It's still early. How about we take a quick ride down to the Saigon docks, enjoy the cool air for a bit, and then head home? What do you think?" "Sounds good. It's still too early for dinner at my house anyway," Van replied. Bao and Van had developed a special bond due to a chance occurrence. Van's brother, Sun, had been Bao's classmate back in 1962. After graduating from high school, Sun joined the Air Force, while Bao pursued his passion for literature and continued his studies at the Saigon College of Letters, eventually earning his bachelor's degree and beginning his teaching career. By chance, during a flood relief mission organized by the Private Teachers Association to aid victims in the southern provinces, Bao was leading the relief team. The Republic of Vietnam's Military Transport Command assigned 2 helicopters to the mission. Sun, who at the time was the deputy commander, was tasked with assisting the relief team and guiding the helicopter crew on the mission. As Sun walked out of the flight command office with his flight helmet in hand, he stopped in surprise when he saw Bao stepping out of the relief team. "Hey, is that Bao?" "Yes, it's me." "Is that you, Sun?" "Yes, it's me." The 2 old friends, who hadn't seen each other in over a decade, greeted each other warmly. Sun gripped Bao's hand tightly. It's been more than 10 years since I last saw you. At first, I didn't recognize you at all, but it's really you. Yeah, I was stationed in NHA Trang before they transferred me here. What about you? Are you married yet? No woman wants me. I'm still single. How about you, Sun? You're a teacher and still haven't found anyone? As for me, I'm in the military, so no woman dares to marry me. They only like us for fun, but not for the long haul. Both laughed, agreeing with the joke. Later that day, after the relief mission, Sun invited Bao to his house to catch up, as he was living with his mother and younger sister. The two rode a Honda together, and as they arrived at the house, Van had just returned from school. She greeted them cheerfully. "Oh, you're home early today, brother." Sun turned to his sister. "It's almost 5 in the afternoon. How is that early, Missy?" "How would I know? You usually don't come home until 8 or 9 at night." "Well, I had a duty to attend to," Sun explained. Van wasn't convinced, and playfully narrowed her eyes at her brother. "Yeah, right. More like you were on duty with your girlfriends." "Enough with that. You're always meddling in my personal life." Sun turned to Bao and introduced him to his sister. "Do you know who this is?" Now realizing there was a guest, Van looked a bit shy and quietly replied, "He's your friend, right?" "Yeah. This is Bao, my classmate from over 10 years ago." Feeling more comfortable now, Bao smiled at Van and nodded in greeting. Van nodded back before heading inside. Once she was out of earshot, Sun spoke up. "That's my sister Van. She's studying English at Saigon University's College of Education. She'll be graduating this year and will start teaching, just like you." Bao grinned, "So I'll have a new colleague soon." Sun's mother, who had just come out carrying a vase of marigolds, saw Sun and called out, "Sun, you're back?" "Yes, Mom. This is Bao, my old school friend. He's visiting." "All right, come inside, both of you. I prepared an offering earlier today for your grandfather, so I'll have Van set the table and we can eat." Bao bowed his head in greeting to Sun's mother, then followed Sun inside. Van had already changed into a new outfit, a stylish pink blouse with white trousers. She stepped out into the living room and asked, "Do you want me to set the table now, or should we wait a little longer?" Sun's mother chimed in, "It's getting late. Go ahead and set the table so we can enjoy the meal." Feeling a bit awkward, Bao leaned over to Sun and whispered, "I just stopped by to see your house, but now I should probably head home. We can meet up another time." Sun laughed, "If you leave now, I'll have Van pack some food for you to take with you." "Got it?" Sun's mother, hearing Bao's polite refusal to stay for dinner, came closer and said, "Don't worry about it. Any friend of Sun's is like family here. Don't feel like you're inconveniencing us." Sun added, "My mom always says that guests who leave the house full are a sign of good fortune. You're new here, so you're not used to it, but my other friends come over all the time. Now let's have a beer together before Van sets the table." Sun went to the fridge and grabbed 2 bottles of 33 beer, handing one to Bao. "Let's sit outside for a bit and enjoy the cool air. It's been so long since I last saw you, Bao. So many of our old classmates have disappeared." "Yeah, most of them went into the military, so it's rare to meet again." "I had no idea I'd run into you today," Bao agreed. Sun pulled a pack of Captain's cigarettes from his flight jacket, offering one to Bao before lighting one himself. "I remember back in school, your family lived in the countryside, right?" "Yeah, your memory is still sharp. But I don't visit there anymore, because the Viet Cong have started showing up regularly." After a long drag from his cigarette, Sun blew the smoke out slowly and stared at the ground in silence for a moment, as if deep in thought. Then he turned to Bao. "What do you think about the war these days, Bao?" Bao didn't answer right away. He brushed his hair back from his forehead and finally replied, "A few years ago, I served in the military, just like you. I was stationed in Da Nang for over a year before I was reassigned to teaching. During that time, I asked myself the same question you're asking me now. In my opinion, this war we're fighting is a proxy war between two ideologies, materialism and idealism. After taking another puff from his cigarette, Bao flicked the remaining stub into the garden and continued. Let me explain it a bit more. These two ideologies, when it comes to the relationship between matter and consciousness, between existence and thought, form the basic issues of philosophy. Marx and Engels are the two key figures who founded dialectical materialism in the mid-19th century, and Lenin further developed it in the early 20th century. To put it simply, the two ideologies we're dealing with are capitalism and communism. The superpowers leading these two sides are the US and the Soviet Union. Small, underdeveloped countries like ours can't stand alone. We have to choose one of these two systems. In my opinion, the key for national leaders is to wisely choose the right path for their people if they want their country to survive in the long run. Take modern Chinese history, for example. During the Qing dynasty, China was fragmented, with different regions following different political systems. The north was under the Manchu monarchy, while the south was influenced by Sun Yat-sen's revolution, which aimed to overthrow the monarchy and establish a democratic system under the three principles of the people. At the same time, Stalin was supporting and training the Chinese Communist Revolution. Western powers like Britain, France, Germany, and Japan were carving up China into different spheres of influence to expand their imperialist empires. The Chinese people were already poor, and this only made them poorer. They had to plow fields like beasts of burden just to pay taxes to their landlords. Local officials were corrupt, and the people's poverty, combined with national humiliation under foreign domination, left them with no way out. The Chinese Communist Party seized this opportunity and eventually succeeded in pushing Chiang Kai-shek's Nationalist Party to Taiwan. I'm sure you've heard of the Chinese Communist leader who recently said, "It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice, it's a good cat." This shows me that communism wasn't their ultimate choice. They followed it because there wasn't a better option at the time. Sensing that he had been talking for a while, Bao paused to gauge Sun's reaction. "Am I rambling, Sun?" Sun shook his head. "No, you're not rambling. You made some very valid points. I respect that. You were meant to be a literature teacher. In Vietnam, everyone knows that Ho Chi Minh was a member of the Communist International, and his ultimate goal was to spread communism throughout Indochina, not just South Vietnam. Whether or not the 1956 Geneva Agreement had led to elections to reunify the country, he still would have sought to conquer all of Vietnam by military force. There's no way he would have adopted any political system other than communism." As the two friends continued their conversation, Van came out and called them in. "Brother, Mr. Bao, dinner is ready." And so, their discussion about current affairs was put on hold. Sun stood up with his beer in hand and nudged Bao. "Come on, let's eat. Don't keep my mom waiting." The dinner that evening was a cheerful affair. Sun introduced Bao to Van, explaining that Bao was teaching Vietnamese literature at a private high school in Saigon. Upon hearing this, Van, who would soon be entering the same profession, commented, "So, you're a teacher, Mr. Bao? All this time, I thought you were in the military with my brother." Bao smiled. "I did serve for about a year in the 1st Military Zone, but then I was reassigned to teaching." Sun chimed in, "Yeah, Bao was drafted into the 2 Duck Reserve Officer School. He didn't even finish his military rations before they sent him back to school." Turning to his sister, Sun added, "Van, once you graduate later this year, if you have any trouble finding a job, you can ask Bao to recommend you to some private schools in Saigon." Van didn't seem pleased and interrupted, "Brother, that sounds so inappropriate. I haven't even graduated yet, and you're already asking for favors." Sensing Van's discomfort, Bao joined in, "Sun is right, Van. I have a few friends who were assigned to remote areas after graduation, and they wrote letters home saying they were miserable and wanted to quit their jobs and return to Saigon. I can't promise anything, but I've been teaching for a while now, so I know a few people. If I can help, I will." Sun's mother, who had been listening quietly, now spoke up. Your brother and Mr. Bao are right, Van. When you graduate, if you don't know anyone, you could end up in a difficult situation, especially as a young woman. Being assigned to a faraway place is much more challenging for a girl than for a man. In a slightly playful tone, Van responded to her mother, Well, I didn't mean it that way, but still. In the Paris Agreement, Dr. Kissinger and President Nixon of the United States pressured President Nguyen Van Thu and Foreign Minister Tran Van Lam of the Republic of Vietnam to sign a peace accord with Le Duc Tho and Xuan Thuy representing the North Vietnamese Communists, and Nguyen Thi Binh representing the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam. From a U.S. political perspective, the goal was for the South Vietnamese military to take over the burden, allowing American forces to withdraw. But as soon as the ink was dry, violence erupted across the entire southern region. The Red Summer saw brutal battles at An Loc, Phuoc Long, Ban Mi Thuot, Pleiku, and many other places. Southern Vietnam, once hailed by the free world as the front line against the spread of communism, was beginning to fall. At this critical juncture, Van graduated from university. The smile had barely settled on the lips of the young English teacher before she received an assignment from the Ministry of Education to teach at a high school in the 1st Military Zone. When the official letter arrived at her home, Van was puzzled by the unfamiliar name of the district and the school. She read it over and over, even consulted maps, but couldn't pinpoint where it was located on this strange, distant land. Seeing her daughter's anxious expression as she turned the letter over repeatedly, Van's mother, who was chewing betel nut while lying in a hammock, asked, "What's that paper you keep looking at, Van?" Van replied in a tired voice, "This." "What's this?" "Let me see." Van stood up and handed the letter to her mother. "I just got this letter. It's my assignment from the ministry to go teach, but I don't know where it is." After glancing at the letter, Van's mother shook her head. "I've lived for almost 80 years, and I've never heard of that district. Let's wait for Son to come home. Maybe he'll know." Van's face brightened as if she had just found the answer to a difficult puzzle. "Yes, you're right, Mom. Brother has been stationed at Da Nang Air Base before. He probably knows these places well. He flies all over, so he must know." When Son came home, Van rushed to him before he even stepped inside, excitedly sharing her news. "Brother, I've been assigned to teach." Son turned to his sister. "Wow, that was fast. I thought you'd have a few weeks off. Where are you assigned?" "I don't even know where this district is." "Here, take a look at the assignment letter and tell me where it is." Van handed the letter to her brother. After a moment, Son shook his head and gave it back. "I think the ministry made a mistake. They shouldn't be sending you out to a place like this. Normally, people are assigned to work in their local area for convenience, not faraway places like this." Growing impatient, Van pressed, "So do you know where this is, or not?" "Of course I know. I landed there a few times. It's a fairly large district in Quang Tri Province, but it's near the DMZ, Demilitarized Zone. I don't think it's a good fit for you." Hearing that her assignment was in such a remote, desolate place made Van anxious. "So what should I do? I can't just refuse the job, can I? Why don't you apply for a transfer to the 3rd Military Zone, citing family reasons? You have a brother in the military, and you need to take care of our elderly mother. I think they'll understand." I talked to Uncle Tu, Hong's father, who works in the ministry's personnel department, and he said that new graduates have to accept remote assignments for about a year before they can apply to transfer back home. It's the same for everyone, not just me. Son shook his head. "I doubt you'll last more than a month, let alone a year. Besides, I've heard things are pretty chaotic out there right now, with Viet Cong shelling the district regularly. It's dangerous." "So, are you saying I shouldn't accept the assignment?" "Yeah, I don't want to say it outright, but think about it. Our family only has the 2 of us. I'm always off on military missions, and you're the only one at home with Mom. If you go, who will be here for her? So, does that mean I'm going to be unemployed after all that schooling?" "Why would you be unemployed? If you can't teach at a public school, just find a job at a private school. No one's going to starve." Suddenly, Sun seemed to remember something. "Oh yeah. I'll talk to Bao and see if he can help you out." Van didn't seem too happy with this idea and gave her brother a side eye. "You always rely on other people too much." Sun quickly defended himself. "He's my close friend, not some stranger. We're just asking for a recommendation, not taking advantage of him. Why are you so worried?" Van muttered under her breath. "Asking for a favor is just a polite way of taking advantage." Sun burst into laughter. "Do you know what? When guys like me help out pretty ladies, people call it being gallant. Especially when the lady is smart and single, like you. Don't call it taking advantage, that sounds so crass." Van retorted. "With soldiers like you, you're always gallant, so wherever you go, women fall for you, and then you end up breaking their hearts. Mr. Bao, on the other hand, is a teacher, a man of education. I'm sure he's different from military men like you." "I beg to differ. I can guarantee you that out of 100 men, 99 of them act like me, and there's only one who swims against the current." "If that's your logic, then one day you'll pay the price for your behavior," Van shot back. Sun laughed heartily. "All right, let's drop this. But I'm telling you, Bao would be a great match for you. Who knows, maybe one day he'll be calling me brother-in-law." Understanding the implication of her brother's teasing, Van playfully slapped him on the back. "Stop it, brother. I'm not talking to you anymore." In the end, Van listened to her mother and son's advice and applied to the Ministry of Education for a transfer closer to home, citing family reasons. The personnel department approved her request, but she had to wait until a position became available. During that time, Bao reached out to the administration at his school and arranged for Van to teach English there. Eventually, everything fell into place, and the young teacher, Van, secured a relatively stable job. Each morning, Bao would arrive at school early, stopping by the break room for coffee, hoping to catch a glimpse of Van before class. Occasionally, if they finished teaching at the same time in the afternoon, Bao would give Van a ride home on his Vespa, saving her from waiting for a taxi. Bao and Van had known each other for over a year, and they got along well, but neither of them dared to step beyond the boundaries of friendship and confess their true feelings. Bao had noticed Van's special gestures toward him many times, and there were moments when he wanted to tell her that he had feelings for her. But he always held back, fearing that Sun would think he was taking advantage of their friendship to pursue his sister. In contrast, both Sun and their mother were just waiting for Bao to make a move. After all, they didn't want to be too forward in offering their daughter to him. The Vietnam War was intensifying. Sun was constantly on duty or sent on missions to distant provinces, leaving him rarely at home. Every evening after finishing his classes, Bao would make time to visit Sun's house to check on the family. Southern Vietnam's situation grew more dire as the United States, along with its allied countries, withdrew support, leaving the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN, to fend for itself, deprived of the resources it needed to survive. It became easy prey for the ravenous communist forces. Then, on April 30, 1975, President Duong Van Minh officially surrendered to the North Vietnamese communists. And with that, it was over. A new chapter in Vietnam's history had begun. It was a rare, costly lesson for those who had placed their faith in the strength and support of allies, only to offer up their nation as the world's frontline in the Cold War. Ho Chi Minh's dream had come true. All of Vietnam was now painted red. Millions fled the country in search of freedom, while tens of millions remained behind, clinging to fragile hopes. That evening, as on every other evening before, the Saigon docks were eerily quiet, with only a handful of people wandering aimlessly or sitting in a daze, staring blankly at the flowing river like lost philosophers. Who were they? They were the remnants of old Saigon, the strange products of a changed world. On the outside, they had been painted red, but their minds remained untainted. Were they once capitalists exploiting the people? Or were they once peasants dressed in rags? Now they all looked alike, and no one could tell what their pasts had been. Bao didn't have the time to figure out the answer. These days, the police were everywhere, from the most remote corners to the narrowest alleyways. Everyone had to mind their own business if they wanted to survive. After parking his bike by a tree, Bao invited Van to sit with him on an empty stone bench by the riverbank. "So, Van, what did you think of today's first political training session?" Van raised an eyebrow at him. "You're a literature professor and you're asking me?" "They told us that from now on, we have to change the way we teach to align with the party's guidelines. That means you're no longer allowed to praise the tale of Kieu as a cultural treasure of Vietnam. You also can't say that Han Mak Tu's romantic poems are brilliant. Now you have to extol the virtues of Stalin, Marx, Lenin, and Ho Chi Minh's revolutionary ideals as the pinnacle of practical scientific thought." Bao stayed silent, gazing far into the distance across the river as he listened to Van. He was still grappling with the thoughts the lecturers had drilled into them earlier, that all forms of art must serve the people and politics according to the principles of socialism. When Van finished speaking, Bao pointed to a clump of water hyacinths floating by. "Van, do you see those water hyacinth flowers drifting by? Aren't they pretty?" Van turned to look at him. "Yes, they're beautiful, but what does that have to do with your question?" "It's related to what the lecturers were saying earlier. They claim that everything we think or do must serve the interests of the people and benefit the working class. In their view, all art created by humans should serve humanity, and not just be art for art's sake. In other words, art must fully serve politics and society. But look at those water hyacinths. Their beauty is a natural creation by God, with no specific purpose to serve humanity. Yet, the vibrant colors of the flowers give us both a moment of relaxation, soothing our souls. In that sense, they inadvertently have an impact on human well-being. When we feel mentally refreshed, we're more productive in our work, aren't we? So you're saying that all artistic creations, whether made by humans or found in nature, carry both functions? Let's broaden the discussion a bit, Van. Water hyacinths, or any flower for that matter, are natural creations born from the harmonious balance of the heavens and the earth. Some are beautiful, some are not. Some have a pleasant fragrance while others smell foul. The same goes for humans. There are beautiful people and not so beautiful ones, smart people and slow learners. Over time, human minds absorb knowledge through research, understanding various aspects of society and the sciences passed down by previous generations. This learning process must be free and unrestricted by rigid rules. Each of us, whether rich or poor, educated or not, carries some degree of artistic potential within us. A true writer or poet, when creating a story or crafting a beautiful poem, can't just do so at will. It requires a blend of mental inspiration and the right environment, much like how a fresh flower needs the right conditions to bloom perfectly. Creative expression must be free and open. If it's restricted, the result will be nothing more than cheap, artificial flowers created to serve specific agendas. That cannot be called true art. After listening to Bao, Van offered her own opinion. "Your words remind me of something. Not long ago, I read a poem by Tahu that left me shocked. I couldn't tell if he was being serious or just being sarcastic. In it, he praised Stalin with lines like, 'I love my father one-fold, but I love you tenfold.' And when Jiang Qing, Chairman Mao Zedong's wife, visited Moscow, she praised Stalin by saying, 'Your health is the happiness of the entire Chinese people.' Don't you think they were glorifying these communist leaders like emperors of old? Mr. Tahu is a renowned figure in the country, yet he loves his own father less than he loves the white big-nosed Stalin by a factor of 10. So does that mean the teachings of our ancestors are no longer correct? Father's labor is like Mount Tai, mother's love is like the water flowing from the source. Is all of that invalid now? Because today, love and loyalty must be reserved for the party and its leaders. Family and morality, those must be discarded, leaving only the party and its leaders as supreme." As she spoke, Van's voice seemed to rise in irritation. Bao gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Calm down a bit, Van. If they hear us, we'll both end up in jail counting the days. Don't you know, no matter where they are, communists are all pretty much the same. They follow the teachings of Marx and Lenin, which they believe to be the one and only path to liberating humanity, a philosophy rooted in dictatorship and violence. As Marx said, the weapon of criticism cannot replace criticism by weaponry. Material force must be overthrown by material force. Do you see that now? After regaining her composure, Van continued, "But does that mean one day the whole world will be painted red?" "I don't think so, Van. History has clearly shown that no single ideology remains absolutely true across generations. As you know, society and people create history. History merely records the phenomena that occurred in society at a particular point in time. In my opinion, Marx and Engels came up with a new ideology because, in the mid-19th century, capitalism had become the dominant economic system in Western Europe. The growing injustice between capitalists and workers sowed the seeds for an increasing class struggle between labor and capital, and between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. This is what led Marx and Engels to shift from idealism to materialism, from democratic revolution to communism, influenced by the social class struggles of that era. Following that, in the early 20th century, Lenin developed Marx's theories into strict doctrines that became the guiding principles for later communist states. So, according to you, communism only succeeds in certain periods or at particular times? Bao glanced at Van, as if probing to see whether she was genuinely interested in understanding communism. "You're asking good questions, but I'm afraid I'm talking too much, and it might bore you. These topics are a bit dry." Van laughed and gave Bao a playful shove. "You're a Vietnamese literature teacher. If it's too dry to swallow, just add a little water, no big deal." "All right, I'll try to make it easier to digest. Here's a challenge for you, Van." She widened her eyes. "I haven't read much about communist theory, so how can I answer your questions?" Bao smiled. "It's a simple one. Do you know the difference between religion and communism?" Well, religion deals with theology, idealism. It generally teaches us to live righteously, build merit, and when we die, we'll go to heaven or some other paradise. Communism, on the other hand, follows materialism. But honestly, I don't really know what they want. So I'll pass the question back to you." Bao clapped his hands softly. "That's close. Let me fill in the rest. Religion and communism are somewhat similar in their goals, with one key difference. Religion says that after death, the souls of the righteous ascend to heaven or paradise. Communism, on the other hand, seeks to establish paradise on earth while we are still alive. So the difference lies in what happens before and after death. That's why religion has persisted and evolved for so long, from ancient times to the present. But communism will never truly establish a paradise on earth. Communism aims for equality, justice, and the end of exploitation between humans. On the surface, it sounds ideal, but if you think deeply, you realize people are not that simple. Humans are complex, more so than any other living creature, because we have intelligence, free will, and reason. According to Marx, theory also becomes a material force once it has gripped the masses. In my view, that means if you repeat something often enough, sooner or later, people will internalize it, and it will become second nature. According to Marx-Lenin theory, the first step is to seize the property of the bourgeoisie, so everyone becomes equally proletarian. This is called the socialist stage, leading up to communism, which is supposedly their final goal. As you've seen, one way they achieve this is through actions like currency reforms and property confiscation, which happened not too long ago. When Bao mentioned this, Van could barely contain her anger and responded, "They claim to be punishing exploitative capitalists, but are they really just robbing the people? If they were confiscating the wealth of corrupt officials who engage in dirty dealings, I'd applaud them. But I've seen so many hard-working, honest people who have become successful through their own thrift and labor, only to be labeled capitalist, so the government has an excuse to rob them. It's utterly unjust. It's like something out of prehistoric times when people weren't yet civilized." Bao chimed in. "Look at communist China. When Mao Zedong took power, he launched the Land Reform Campaign, and countless people were brutally persecuted and unjustly killed in struggle sessions. Then came Mao's 100 Flowers campaign, which was a trap to weed out intellectuals who opposed him. Finally, there was the Cultural Revolution, led by Jiang Qing and the Red Guards, which wreaked havoc on China's intellectual and artistic communities. Even within the Communist Party, internal power struggles were common. So tell me, how can we say communists are good when they use such devious methods? At this point, Bao realized they had been discussing the new regime for quite some time. Glancing at his watch, he turned to Van. "We've been so wrapped up in talking about society that we've lost track of time. Let's not keep your mother waiting and worrying about dinner." Van smiled. "Why don't you come over and join us for dinner?" "Thanks, Van, but I'll pass this time. I didn't let Aunt Nam know I wouldn't be home, and I don't want her to wait for me." Time dragged on, filled with the dull, fearful days of a Saigon under new rule. The once bustling streets with their spacious shops, where buyers and sellers used to come and go in droves, were now unrecognizable. At night, dim yellow lights barely illuminated the gaunt faces of the hungry, scavenging through piles of trash to collect plastic bags or wandering in search of a place to sleep until morning. These people were now the true embodiment of the proletariat, the very class the party had claimed to liberate. Uncle Nam, who used to run a clothing store in Cho Lan, had been elevated to the role of a bicycle tire repairman, working under a tamarind tree in front of his house. Aunt Nam had fared slightly better, growing a few rows of sweet potatoes in the backyard, which she planned to secretly dig up to sell in the neighborhood for some extra cash to buy rice, all while evading the local police. Bao still rented a room at Uncle Nam's house, but with his meager teacher's salary, he handed most of it to them for food and rent, keeping only a little for personal necessities. Since Uncle Nam's eldest son had gone missing, the couple treated Bao like their own son and never fretted about the money he contributed each month. The bureaucratic state control and the family registry system were like shackles, tightly binding the people to the oppressive communist regime. Even in Russia, the birthplace of communism, where it had ruled for over 60 years since 1917, people were still standing in line for bread, and the secret police continued to monitor them in various ways. So one might ask, is this the paradise of communism, or is it hell on earth? After 2 years of living under communism, all Bao saw was lies and manipulation. During his lectures, he sometimes felt like he was losing his mind. His body was nothing more than a machine, spouting lifeless words to glorify a godless regime. He was no longer the Nguyen of old, whose literary critiques once brought the classroom to applause. Today, after a particularly dull lesson, Bao stopped by the tamarind tree to chat with Uncle Nam, who was busy repairing a bicycle tire. As Bao approached, Uncle Nam called out, "Your bike needs its brakes adjusted. Bring it here and I'll fix it for you. I just tightened the bolts yesterday. Maybe they've loosened again." "Well, you have to tighten them really well, otherwise they'll slip when you brake. Oh, by the way, Van stopped by earlier to ask about you. She said she hadn't seen you in days and was worried. If you have time later, you should go visit her. I've been busy preparing lessons for the past few days, so I haven't been able to visit." As soon as Bao finished speaking, Uncle Nam stepped closer and asked quietly, "Any news about her brother? That Air Force major, have you heard anything?" "No, I haven't, Uncle. Van was let go from the school because they said she had connections to an American-backed family." Uncle Nam shook his head and sighed. "What a strange system. They won't use talented people, instead they employ fools. How can society progress like that? Well, your brakes are fixed. Try it out, and then go have dinner." We hope you enjoyed the excerpt from this chapter. The complete audiobook of The Last Flight Out by Nguyen Van Ba can be purchased on platforms like Google Play and others. Please subscribe to this channel for more content like this.